He said he wanted a woman who'd make other men jealous. Someone flawless.
Polished.
Someone who'd shine when he held her arm in public and stay silent when the doors closed. He called it love. I called it a cage wrapped in compliments. At first, I smiled through it like every perfect wife does. Until one day I realized trophies only look beautiful when someone's polishing them. But what happens when the trophy starts moving on its own? When it decides to stop standing on the shelf? When it learns its own worth, and the hand that held it starts to shake? Because this time, I wasn't the prize he won. He was the lesson I learned. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the Revenge by Sophia channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. The night glittered like a dream. Golden lights, soft music, and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Clara stood at the altar, wrapped in white silk and nervous hope, watching Ethan's confident smile stretch wide across the crowd. He looked like the perfect man, handsome, charming, every word rehearsed to sound like love. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume, and every guest whispered about how lucky she was. But beneath her smile, Clara's hands trembled. Not from fear, but from something she couldn't name yet. When Ethan leaned close and whispered, "You're mine now," his tone sounded more like ownership than affection. The cheers rose, the music played louder, and for a fleeting second, Clara's heart whispered a quiet question. Did I just marry love or control dressed in a tuxedo? At first, life looked like a magazine cover. Weekend getaways, diamond necklaces, and laughter that echoed through marble halls. Ethan loved to show her off. "Smile, darling," he'd say at every party, placing a hand on her waist as photographers captured her frozen beauty. To everyone else, they were perfection, the powerful husband, the graceful wife. But behind the flash of cameras, Clara began to notice the chill in his compliments. He never said you're beautiful, only you're presentable. He never said I love you, only you complete my image. Each word carved a little silence inside her, a hollow place she didn't know how to fill. And yet, she told herself, maybe this is what love looks like, quiet, polished, and a little lonely. But late at night, when the laughter faded, she wondered, why did it feel like the walls were listening? It started small, almost invisible. One morning, Clara wore a blue dress she loved. Ethan looked up from his coffee and said softly, "That color doesn't flatter you. Try the white one." His tone was calm, but his eyes left no room for choice. Another night, he corrected the way she laughed. Too loud, too real.
"People notice," he said.
"You don't want to embarrass me." The world around her grew quieter as she tried harder to please him. Her reflection in the mirror no longer looked familiar. Her smile seemed borrowed, her voice rehearsed. She wasn't Clara anymore. She was Ethan's creation. And yet, beneath that still surface, something fragile began to stir, a whisper of defiance, or maybe survival. Because every perfect marriage hides the sound of a crack waiting to echo. The mansion glittered every weekend, chandeliers dripping with light, guests in shimmering gowns, laughter echoing through rooms that smelled of wine and perfume. Clara stood by Ethan's side, every curl of her hair placed perfectly, every smile timed for effect. She laughed when he laughed, nodded when he spoke, and posed when he wanted to impress his business partners. People looked at her with admiration, envy, maybe even desire, but never connection. Sometimes, she'd catch her reflection in the glass, beautiful, yes, but hollow, like a porcelain doll on display. Ethan's hand never rested on her out of affection, only possession. "You make me look successful," he whispered once, his voice smooth like poison and silk. The words clung to her skin long after the guests were gone. That night, as she removed her makeup, she wondered, if no one's looking, do I even exist? Days became a cycle of perfection, morning routines, designer outfits, polite smiles. Ethan monitored every detail of her world, how she spoke, what she wore, even who she texted. "It's just guidance," he'd say when she questioned him. "I want you to be your best." But his version of best always meant obedient. Clara began to shrink in ways no one could see, her voice softer, her opinions vanished, her dreams shelved behind his achievements. He introduced her as my beautiful wife, never by her name. And the more he bragged about her, the less she felt real. Once, she caught herself whispering her own name in the mirror, just to hear it aloud, Clara. But even her reflections seemed unsure. Every day she wondered, how long before perfection kills the person wearing it? One afternoon, while Ethan took a call in his study, Clara walked through the silent house. The sound of his voice, sharp, commanding, drifted down the hallway. She paused at a half-open door and saw a wall of photographs, the two of them at parties, smiling in every frame. But the eyes in those pictures didn't belong to her anymore. They were empty, captured, caged. Her heart thudded painfully as she realized every image was proof of how well she'd learned to play her part. The world saw love. She saw a lie. A chill crawled up her spine as Ethan's voice echoed from the other room. Perfection isn't optional. She stepped back quietly, the words searing into her chest like a brand. And for the first time, a thought flickered. What happens if I stop being perfect? It began with small requests that sounded harmless. Maybe don't visit your mother this weekend. She drains your energy. Your friends don't really understand our lifestyle, do they? Bit by bit, the walls closed in, disguised as care. Ethan smiled as he said it, always gentle, always persuasive, until Clara realized that her phone rarely rang anymore. The laughter of her old friends had faded into memory. The house grew quiet, too quiet. Even the ticking clock felt like it was watching her. And when she mentioned loneliness, Ethan only smiled and said, "You have me. Isn't that enough?" But his smile didn't reach his eyes. And Clara began to wonder, what happens when the world you live in only has one door, and he's the one holding the key? The change was subtle, a misplaced item, a comment about her tone, a lingering look that made her question herself. One evening, as they prepared for another party, Ethan frowned at her earrings. "You're not listening," he murmured, taking them off and replacing them with another pair. "These look more refined." His fingers were careful, almost tender, but his control was absolute. Later that night, when she accidentally spilled a drop of wine on the carpet, he didn't raise his voice. He simply stared at the stain until she felt smaller than the glass she held. "Be better," he whispered. "That's all I ask." But Clara could feel it now. Better meant obedient, and obedient meant silent. Her reflections started to fade from her mind, and a thought kept echoing. How can someone so beautiful feel so invisible? The nights became colder, even when the room was warm. Clara would sit at her vanity, staring into the mirror as the clock ticked past midnight. The woman staring back looked flawless. Perfect hair, perfect face, but her eyes trembled with something she couldn't hide anymore. She'd practiced smiling, just to remember how it felt. Sometimes she'd whisper to the mirror, "You're okay," but the reflection never believed her. Ethan's footsteps in the hallway made her chest tighten. The moment the door opened, she'd sit straighter, fix her face, and bury her emotions under layers of calm. But inside, her thoughts screamed for air. Because she finally understood, she wasn't a wife anymore. She was a possession that learned to breathe quietly. And as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, one question refused to leave her mind. What happens when the cage starts to break, from the inside? The dining room glowed under crystal lights, gold cutlery, glasses gleaming like stars. Ethan sat at the head of the table, charming the guests with his confidence and perfect composure. Clara sat beside him, her smile painted on like the shimmer on her necklace. Laughter filled the air, but she barely heard it. Her mind floated elsewhere, between exhaustion and quiet rebellion. Then it happened. One of Ethan's business partners complimented her intelligence, saying she seemed more than just a pretty face. Ethan chuckled, placing a hand on her arm. "Oh, Clara's not much for deep conversations," he said lightly. "She's more of a decoration." The table laughed. She didn't. Her cheeks burned, and her fingers tightened around her fork until her knuckles went white. And in that moment, she realized He hadn't just stolen her freedom. He'd stolen her dignity, too. The laughter still echoed in her ears long after the night ended, but inside her chest, something cracked. The car hummed through the city streets, headlights flashing through the tinted windows like ghosts passing by. Neither of them spoke. Ethan's jaw was tight, his eyes locked on the road. Clara stared out the window, watching the reflection of her face flicker against the glass, pale, cold, and trembling. Finally, she whispered, "Why would you say that?" He didn't look at her. "It was a joke. Don't overreact." "A joke," she said quietly. "You made me feel like..." "Like what?"
His tone sharpened.
"You should be grateful, Clara. Everything you have is because of me." The words landed heavier than his silence ever could. She turned her face away, blinking hard as tears threatened to spill. In the hum of the car, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't scared of him yelling. She was scared because he didn't need to. His calm was worse. And deep inside, a new voice whispered, "This will not happen again." That night, when the mansion fell quiet, Clara sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection. Her lipstick was smeared, mascara smudged beneath tired eyes, but beneath the ruin, she saw something new, a spark, a faint, defiant glimmer. She heard Ethan in another room, speaking softly on the phone, laughing, confident, untouchable. Her fingers brushed over the pearls on her neck, and she thought about every time he told her who to be. Every smile she faked. Every time she swallowed her pride just to keep the peace. No more. Not again. She took a deep breath and whispered, "You wanted a trophy, Ethan. But you forgot trophies don't stay still forever." Outside, thunder rolled through the sky, shaking the windows. And as the lightning flashed across her face, she smiled for the first time. Not out of joy, but out of clarity. Because the woman in the mirror didn't look afraid anymore. She looked ready. Clara began to watch Ethan the way he once watched her. Quietly, carefully, pretending not to notice. Every morning, she memorized his routines: when he left, when he made calls, who he trusted. He liked power, attention, and control, but more than anything, he liked praise. She saw it in the way he lit up when people flattered him, in the way he turned cold when someone questioned him. She started keeping notes, small, hidden, harmless looking. A smile here, a silence there. At breakfast, she'd nod as he spoke about business, all while her mind tracked his every move. "Always listen," he used to say. And now, she was more than he ever realized. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone, she caught a glimpse of a message, an unfamiliar name, a woman's name. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes flickered. Clara said nothing, because sometimes silence is sharper than accusation. When Ethan left for his weekend conference, Clara made her first call, to someone he had erased from her life. Her old friend, Lila, answered hesitantly. "Clara? I thought you disappeared." Her voice trembled. "I almost did." Over coffee in a quiet cafe, Clara told Lila only part of the truth, enough to rebuild trust, but not enough to show her plan. Lila listened, her eyes filled with anger and pity. "You don't deserve this," she said. Clara smiled faintly. "I know. That's why I'm not keeping it." She began reconnecting with others too, quietly, cautiously, people Ethan thought were gone from her life. A lawyer, an old colleague, even a journalist she once met at a charity event. She didn't tell them everything, just enough to set the pieces on the board. And with every new message, every secret meeting, she felt the cage grow weaker. Because the moment she reached out, she stopped being alone. By the end of that month, Clara was different. Her steps felt lighter, her voice steadier, her gaze colder. Ethan didn't notice, not at first. He thought her calm meant surrender. But it was the stillness of someone sharpening the knife behind the smile. She changed her wardrobe, softer colors, simpler style, nothing that would draw suspicion. But under that calm, she gathered documents, emails, bank records. She pieced together a side of Ethan the world didn't know, debts, lies, affairs, all carefully hidden behind his charm. And every night, She rehearsed what she'd say when the time came, how she'd stand tall while he fell apart. One evening, as Ethan admired himself in the mirror, he said, "I like this version of you. You've finally learned how to be perfect." Clara looked at him, her lips curved just enough to hide the truth. "I'm glad you think so," she whispered, because perfection was exactly what she'd used to destroy him. Clara stopped smiling on cue. At the next gala, she stood beside Ethan like a living portrait, but the sparkle in her eyes was gone, replaced with something sharper, watchful. She answered questions politely, but only just enough to keep suspicion from forming. The words came out softer, slower, with subtle pauses that made Ethan shift uncomfortably. He noticed a raised eyebrow, a slight frown, but he dismissed it with a polite laugh. "You're nervous," he said. Clara tilted her head. "I'm observing," she murmured. And in that one word, a ripple of doubt passed through him. Why is she observing me? He wondered. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel fully in control. In the following weeks, Clara's careful changes became more noticeable. She asked questions about his work, not idle ones, but pointed, insightful questions that made him stumble over simple explanations. She remembered details he'd forgotten to mention, pointing out contradictions in his carefully constructed stories. During a dinner at home, she casually mentioned an expense he thought she hadn't noticed. His hand froze over his wine glass. "Where did you?" he began, voice tight. Clara smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, I just keep track," she said. He tried to laugh, brushing it off, but the sound fell flat. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing something terrifying. The trophy he owned had started to move on its own. One evening, as Ethan left for a late meeting, Clara went through his study, silently, carefully, like a ghost no one could see. Files, receipts, and emails spilled out across the polished desk. Each one told a story of greed, lies, and manipulation. She discovered offshore accounts, secret loans, and deals made behind his closest allies' backs.
She didn't panic.
She didn't take action yet. Instead, she smiled quietly to herself, the first genuine smile in months. "I see you now," she whispered. By the time Ethan returned, everything looked untouched, the papers back in neat piles, the room immaculate. But the seed of fear had been planted. He didn't know it yet, but the mask he wore for the world was about to crumble, and the woman beside him was the one holding the match. Clara worked in silence for weeks, piecing together every secret Ethan had tried to hide. Bank statements, emails, hidden contracts, each one a puzzle piece of the life he thought only he could control. She photographed documents, recorded conversations, and stored everything carefully on encrypted drives. Every night, she reviewed them again, memorizing the details like a chess master planning her next move. One evening, she whispered to herself, "You can't charm your way out of this, Ethan." The thought sent a chill down her spine, but it was exhilarating. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. She was preparing to show him just how powerless he truly was. And deep inside, a small, fierce thrill sparked. He's never going to see it coming. The night of the charity gala arrived, glittering with chandeliers, applause, and the hum of high society. Ethan was the same charming man everyone admired, smooth, polished, confident. Clara arrived beside him, dressed simply, almost understated, her calm hiding the storm she carried. She smiled politely, nodding at acquaintances, all while her mind counted the moments, rehearsed her words, and prepared her reveal. As the evening progressed, she leaned close to Ethan, whispering seemingly innocent questions, small probes that made him stumble slightly in front of others. Her tone was soft, but each question carried subtle weight. Guests didn't notice. Ethan didn't notice yet, but Clara did. And with every misstep he made, she felt the invisible chains around herself grow lighter. How long before he realizes the game has already begun? Finally, the moment came. During a toast, Clara spoke, her voice calm, clear, and confident. She shared anecdotes, subtle truths about Ethan's generosity, and then carefully, like a knife sliding between ribs, She dropped hints of secrets he had tried to bury. The room shifted, laughter faded, whispers began. Ethan's charm faltered. He stuttered, trying to regain control, but the more he spoke, the worse it became. Emails, accounts, and lies he thought hidden were now subtly referenced by Clara, enough for those paying attention to notice. The high society he had mastered now turned into a mirror reflecting his deception. And as the final toast ended, he realized the woman he thought was his perfect, silent trophy had become the architect of his exposure. The room buzzed with curiosity, suspicion, and disbelief. And in that charged silence, Clara's eyes met his. A single thought raced through his mind. How did I let this happen? Ethan returned home that night, the gala's echoes still haunting him. His usual confident stride faltered as he saw the subtle smirks, whispered glances, and raised eyebrows of guests he once commanded. Emails had circulated quietly, proof of hidden debts and lies now in the hands of people who mattered, people who had respected him blindly. Clara watched him from across the room, calm, almost serene. He opened his mouth to speak, to charm, to redirect, but no words came. Each heartbeat echoed the same terrifying truth. I built this empire, and she just pulled the foundation out from under me. The walls of his world, once solid and gleaming, began to crack before his very eyes. By morning, news had spread. Texts, whispers, and subtle announcements painted Ethan as a man who had lived in deception. He tried to call, to explain, to deny, but no one listened anymore. Business partners hesitated. Friends kept their distance. Even the media, the very audience he once controlled, hinted at scandal. Clara passed him in the hallway, poised and untouched by his panic. "You wanted perfection," she said softly, almost mockingly. He swallowed, words failing him, and she smiled faintly. Not out of kindness, but as a reminder. He had underestimated her, and now he paid the price. For the first time, Ethan saw what he had truly lost: control, pride, and the illusion of ownership. That evening, Clara sat alone in the quiet house, the hum of the city faint through the windows. Ethan didn't enter. He lingered on the edge of rooms, searching for any sign of the woman he thought he owned. But Clara's silhouette in the soft lamp light was untouchable, untied, untamed. He realized, painfully, that trophies may glitter for a moment, but they cannot be contained forever. Clara had taken back more than dignity. She had taken freedom, strength, and power he could never reclaim. As she poured herself a glass of wine, the calmness in her movements spoke volumes. And in the dark corners of his mind, one question repeated endlessly. How did I think I could ever own her? The fall was complete. The predator had become the prey. And Clara finally breathed. The mansion felt different now. Rooms once filled with tension and silent judgment were quiet, almost peaceful. Clara walked through them freely, each step a reminder that she no longer needed to perform. The air smelled lighter, her breathing deeper. The weight she had carried for years, of smiles forced and words censored, had finally lifted. She didn't rush. She sat by the windows, watching the sunlight spill across the marble floors. For the first time in months, she felt present in her own life, rather than a reflection of someone else's desires. And as she sipped her tea, she whispered to herself, "I'm free." Meanwhile, Ethan's world shrank. Calls went unanswered, partners backed away, and friends' eyes avoided his. He wandered through the empty halls, glancing at photographs where he once looked powerful and admired. Now they seemed like hollow reminders, symbols of control he could no longer claim. He realized too late that all the charm, all the calculated perfection, had been meaningless. Clara's calm and collected presence contrasted sharply with the chaos consuming him. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the house, he finally understood. The trophy was never his to keep. Clara spent days reconnecting with herself, her friends, and her ambitions. She painted again, wrote again, and laughed without fearing judgment. Every small act of joy was a rebellion against the years she had spent trapped. She learned to see her reflection not as a decoration, but as a person, strong, capable, untouchable. Sometimes she thought of Ethan, wondering if he remembered her as the obedient wife he thought he had. Then she smiled softly and shook her head. "He never understood me," she whispered. And that realization, that clarity, was more powerful than revenge itself. Clara had regained what he could never take away, herself. Clara stood before a small gathering of close friends, her posture calm, her voice steady. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate, describing the life she had lived under Ethan's control. She didn't shout or cry. Her quiet intensity was far more powerful. Every story she told, the small humiliations, the manipulations, the subtle terrors, left the listeners wide-eyed, tense, and shocked. When she spoke of the gala and the hidden secrets she had uncovered, the room leaned in closer. Her words were like whispers of justice, measured, precise, and almost poetic. And as she finished, her eyes swept the room, a soft smile playing at the corners of her lips. This is what freedom looks like. She reflected on the woman she had once been, the quiet, obedient, polished image of perfection. "I thought I needed to be flawless to be loved," she said, her tone soft but firm. "But I've learned that real power isn't in perfection. It's in knowing your worth, even when someone tries to define it for you." Her audience remained silent, hanging on every word. Clara's voice carried no anger now, only clarity. She had become something Ethan could never control, never break, never own. And in that moment, she understood. She was no longer a trophy. She was the prize, untouchable, unstoppable. Later, alone, Clara stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. The house was quiet, the air still, but the weight of the past hung in the corners like shadows that had finally fled. She thought of Ethan, imagining him wandering his empty halls, realizing too late what he had lost. She whispered softly, almost to herself. "You wanted perfection. You wanted control. You wanted a trophy. But I became the storm you could never contain." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The words were not a threat. They were a truth. And as Clara turned from the window, her reflection smiled back at her, strong, free, and radiant. For the first time, she felt complete. Because some prizes aren't given. They're claimed. They say some women are born to be adored and others to be feared. But the truth? We are not ornaments to be owned. We are storms waiting for silence to break. He built a pedestal and placed me on it, not knowing I'd use it to rise higher. His fortune bought him everything but a conscience, and when I left, that's what cost him the most. Now, when he looks at me from a distance, he doesn't see beauty. He sees consequence. Because trophies may shine for a while, but only the woman who walks away learns how to glitter without gold.